At the start of the 2000s, Apple was not the company we know today. There was no iPhone, no iPad, just computers, and even those weren't selling very well. After years of chaos in the 90s, Apple was rebuilding itself under Steve Jobs. The iMac had brought some attention back, but Apple was still seen as niche, a creative company that made expensive computers, not something that could change the world again. But inside Apple offices, something was shifting. A small team of engineers had an idea that sounded simple, almost boring on paper: a portable music player. There were already MP3 players out there, but none of them felt right. They were slow, ugly, confusing, and limited. Transferring songs took forever, the batteries died fast, and storage was tiny. And Apple's team thought they could fix that. They didn't want to make just another music player. They wanted to make the best one. One that would be fast, beautiful, and perfectly integrated with a computer. Something you'd actually enjoy using. Nobody knew it yet, but this project would change everything. This is the story of how the first iPod was built, the device that turned Apple from a struggling computer company into a cultural icon. But first, we need to understand what Apple looked like before it existed. By the late 90s, Apple wasn't the cool, sleek company we know now. It was a struggling computer manufacturer with declining market share. Steve Jobs had just returned to the company in '97 after being ousted more than a decade earlier. Apple's product line was bloated. Jobs immediately began cutting projects and simplifying everything. And the result was the iMac G3, that colorful translucent desktop released in '98. It was a hit, and it saved Apple from bankruptcy. But Jobs knew one product couldn't keep the company alive. He needed something that would reach beyond traditional computers, something that could make Apple relevant to everyday consumers again. Now, at the same time, another revolution was happening in music. CDs were still popular, but MP3s were exploding in the late 90s thanks to the internet. Napster, launched in '99, made it possible to share songs instantly and illegally. People were digitizing their entire music libraries, but there was no easy or legal way to manage or play all those files. Portable players existed, but they were clunky, had poor interfaces and tiny storage. Most could only hold 20 to 30 songs, and transferring files was painfully slow over USB 1.0. Jobs saw an opening. Apple could take advantage of this new music trend, but it needed the right hardware. In early 2001, Apple had the software side figured out. They had recently bought an app called SoundJam MP, created by developers Jeff Rubin and Bill Kincaid. Apple rebranded it as iTunes, releasing it in January 2001. But iTunes was just the library, the storage. What Apple didn't have was the actual player. Enter Tony Fadell, a former engineer at Philips who had been pitching an idea for a portable music player that worked with an online software. He had tried to sell it to companies like Real Networks and Philips, but no one was really interested. In early 2001, Apple hired Fadell as a contractor, and its job? Create a portable digital music player that could integrate perfectly with iTunes and the Mac. Apple's hardware head, John Rubinstein, joined forces with Fadell. Rubinstein found a key component while visiting Toshiba in Japan: a 1.8-inch hard drive, small enough to fit in your pocket, but large enough to hold gigabytes of songs. The discovery made the iPod possible. Once Apple approved the project, things moved fast, almost unbelievably fast. The iPod was developed in just 8 months. Fadell led the concept, Rubinstein oversaw hardware, and Jeff Rubin, the original SoundJam developer, handled the software. The design was handled by Jonathan Ive. Ive focused on minimalism: clean white front, stainless steel back, and a scroll wheel surrounded by circular buttons. The idea was that anyone could pick it up and instantly understand how to use it. Now, internally, the iPod was powered by a 5GB Toshiba hard drive, a FireWire port for ultra-fast syncing with Macs, a battery that can last around 10 hours, 2-inch monochrome display, and a small ARM-based processor. In total, the first iPod had just 5 physical buttons and a wheel. Yet it could manage thousands of songs, and by October 2001, it was ready.
We have something really exciting for you today.
Steve Jobs unveiled the iPod at a small press event on October 23, 2001. Unlike the massive unveilings Apple does now, this one took place at Apple's headquarters in Cupertino, with only a handful of journalists invited. Jobs stood on stage and pulled the device out of his pocket.
I happen to have one right here in my pocket, matter of fact. There it is, right there.
The iPod could hold 1,000 songs on a 5GB drive, weighed just 6.5 ounces or 184 grams, and had 10 hours of battery life. It cost $399, a lot of money in 2001, and it only worked with Macs through FireWire. Still, for many it was love at first sight. The press reaction was mixed but intrigued. The New York Times called it beautiful, simple, and elegant. Wired magazine described it as small, fast, and just works. Apple's own marketing tagline said it all: 1,000 songs in your pocket. It wasn't just about specs, it was about the feeling of control. Suddenly, you could carry your entire music library anywhere, instantly accessible, with no clutter, no discs, and no limits. Now, even though the iPod was impressive, it wasn't an overnight success. The first model's Mac-only limitation meant it reached only a small audience. Apple's computer market share at the time was only around 5%. That meant roughly 95% of people simply couldn't use it. The $399 price tag was also steep, especially when cheaper MP3 players existed. But the people who did buy it loved it. It was slick, fast, and fun to use. The real breakthrough came the following year. In 2002, Apple released a Windows-compatible iPod, expanding its potential audience by millions. It also introduced larger 10 and 20GB models, adding more songs and better battery life. By 2003, Apple had launched the iTunes Music Store, letting users buy songs legally for 99 cents each, a direct answer to the Napster era. At that moment, Apple didn't just sell a gadget, they built an ecosystem: hardware, software, and content, all seamlessly connected, and that's when things exploded. From 2003 onward, the iPod became a cultural icon. Apple released new designs almost every year. The iPod mini in 2004 with its pastel colors and aluminum body. Then the iPod Nano in 2005, replacing the mini with flash storage. The iPod Shuffle, a tiny screenless version that focused on simplicity. And eventually, the iPod Touch, essentially an iPhone but without the phone. By 2006, Apple had sold over 88 million iPods, and by 2010, that number would exceed to almost 300 million. It wasn't just a music player anymore, it was like a fashion statement. This white rectangle thing with a white earbuds became instantly recognizable, appearing in Apple's now iconic silhouette ads. The iPod changed not just how we listen to music, but how we related to it. Music became mobile, personal, and emotional again, just like the Walkman had done 2 decades earlier. Ironically, the device that made Apple a household name was eventually killed by Apple itself.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. But what we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen. A giant screen. Now,
when the iPhone launched in 2007, it combined 3 products at once.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it?
a phone, an internet communicator, and an iPod. Slowly, the standalone music player faded away. Apple kept producing iPods for years, with the iPod Classic, Nano, Shuffle, and Touch all evolving. But by the mid-2010s, smartphones had replaced them completely. And in May 2022, Apple officially discontinued the last remaining iPod, the iPod Touch. The company's statement said, "The spirit of iPod lives on." And it's true. Every time you open Apple Music, browse a playlist, or listen on AirPods, you're still using the foundation that started with that first iPod in 2001. The iPod changed Apple from a computer company into a cultural brand. It led directly to the iTunes Store, the iPhone, and the App Store, a whole new era of digital life. The first iPod was more than a product. It was a shift in thinking. It showed that technology didn't have to be complicated to be powerful. It could be simple, elegant, and human. It made people fall in love with their music again, and with Apple too. And while that little rectangle might look outdated now, it changed everything about how we experience sound. It didn't just fit in your pocket, it fit into your life. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Make sure you like, subscribe, maybe even comment, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.